Hey, it's Chris Liege again. So we're talking about Fromage, everything you need to know to figure out whether or not this very unique worker placement style game where you're cooking up some cheese on a round by round basis is for you or not. R2Y games. I will make the argument right now that this is clearly head and shoulders above, mechanically speaking, all the other R2I games. Just that much better. But is it for you? Let's go and do this. What do you need to know about Fromage? This is a clever twist on the worker placement style of things. You're going to be having these little cheese, 3 different types of varieties on a 4 different platter style board, combined with an inner resource gathering that's going to give you many ways, point salad, point buffet of scoring. And this is going to be where the tricky part comes in. I'm going to make the argument at the beginning of the video right here that with this setup, having the 4 different areas and the changes that happen from the 4 player to the non 4 and 3 player, that it's going to be best at 4, it's going to be fine at 3, it's not going to be quite as good at 2. And that's because on these areas, if you look around closely on the board, you'll see these little squared off areas that have the little symbol of cancel, can't place workers there. And so some of the true interaction, some of the rampant point scoring is really going to be present at the higher levels, and it can be a little less even if the experience of said players in the first place is not going to be as even at the lower player counts. All 4 of these areas are going to score differently. It's relatively straightforward. The intuitive mechanisms work, that make sense. The inner part of the board, also from a resource management style of things, is completely coherent. There's no complexity in the actual rules and how things are going to go together, but the actual doing of the how to go together, of how well you can do it, that's where this game shines, and that's where this game is really difficult, and that's how I find I'm a pretty bad gamer as a whole, when your high score is like the lowest of the previous prototypers review score. So right, but what do you need to know? You've got the 4 areas in the middle, those are your resources. You got the 4 areas around the outside. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be slowly placing your cheeses in one of these areas, but it has to correspond to one of the workers you have, because you have 3 workers of 3 different types of cheese, if you will. For lack of a clearer explanation here, we'll go that you have a yellow, a blue, and a white cheese. And you're also going to have your little cheese squares. In order to play one of these cheese squares in one of these locations that's not a resource here, in one of these outer areas, if you will, you have to have the cheese color that matches up with your worker. And then you place one of the workers over the square, and then you get whatever is indicated there. Now you have the ability to get one resource as well if you have a worker to also place them in the middle. And this again corresponds to the number of turns that it's going to take you to get back the worker, because the worker is not automatically recalled. The worker is only recalled when it faces you. So you'll see that these wedges can kind of face any direction. And what's going to happen is you're going to lazy Susan this at the end of every turn, and you rotate it, and you get to see, okay, gradually when that worker now points back to me, okay, I get to take it off, put it back in my retinue. But you'll notice that again, these workers have to correspond to the cheeses you're laying down in front of you in the gold, silver, or bronze areas, and those are all going to affect the point scoring. The middle essentially is also your resources, your cows, your orders or recipe cards, your architecture, your structural buildings, and your fruit. Fruit is used to make jam or breads to go along with the cheese in the first place in a way to get bonus points. Cows are going to produce milk. Milk allows you to produce more than one cheese a turn, because like I said, you can only put down one of these guys in the cheese area, one of the wedges, if you will, on a turn-by-turn basis. But if you play a milk, you can get 2. Or you have the structures. The structures are going to come in the form of these tiles. These tiles are going to be asymmetric structures that you put 3 of at the top of your player board at the beginning of the game that you can draft from when you get more advanced in this game. I definitely don't recommend it necessarily in the first game. You don't know how they're going to be for your interaction or your play style, what you prefer. And then the last one is the recipe cards or the order cards. Again, these order cards as a way to score different points. If you lay a blue one in a gold area, then you get this. And how this plays in is you have those 4 different areas that I just mentioned here, and you get to lay these down in the area of which you achieve it in. And so it becomes more of a set collection of your cheeses in that area on top of the other 4 ways that all of the individual areas score. So you'll see that again, there's combinations of all of them as you go across. Some of them will actually even have the jam symbol, meaning you have to do it with a jam or a fruit there in the first place. The 4 different areas are distinctly unique in how they score, and you just need to be aware of them. Nothing really over complex though, and this plays into the dynamic of the actual strategy. So here are the 4 areas. Here's the bistro. Bistro scores by the number of tables completed times the total of your plate point values. Plates are worth silver 1, gold 2, and then you multiply it by how many tables are complete that you have presence in. So blue has 2 tables that are complete here, and they have bronze, bronze, gold is worth 2, and so they'd be only 2 times 1 there. Black has 2 areas complete, and black has 1, 2, 3, 4. So it'd be 4 times 2. Black is going to get 8 points there. That's the bistro. Bistro score is very straightforward. Fromagerie, again, you just want to have 1s in each of the separate different racks, and you can see there's only 3 different spots in each rack, so at the higher player counts, it's going to be a little tougher. You get the bonus of whatever's listed at the top when you play it there. Very straightforward. More sets, more points. Then we go over here to the festival. Festival is also a set collection style of things, but it's an adjacency issue, and just like the next one in a slightly different way. The red, yellow, blues, and blacks, though, these tops count for everybody, and they're considered adjacent to whoever is next to them. And so for in this case, blue is going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 area, where black only has a 1, 2, and so higher areas, more points. And then the last one up here, I'm going to mispronounce that, so we're not even going to pronounce it at all. You have the trucks, and so the truck point scoring is based on who touches the area the most. So in this case, this dark blue touches it twice, black only touches it once. So blue is going to get the 2 trucks, and in this case, they're worth 2 points. And that's just how you go through all 6 of the different areas. And that's the point scoring mechanism that you need to know. So the other point scores, like I mentioned, you have the recipe order cards that are going to go along the bottom of each of these 4 areas. So when you complete a cheese order in that area, it goes under that area on your board. So the point scoring for that is going to be nonlinear increasing as you have more recipes in one area fulfilled. And then the last area you're going to have is you're going to have those structures that may give you bonus points. You're going to have the fruit, which is going to give you bonus points, as well as any additional cows or structures on top of what you can be built in the first place. And those are going to give you additional points as well. That leads me to the player board. Let's show me the player board really quickly, and then we'll get to my final thoughts. So here's the player board overall. What you do at the beginning of the game is you have the ability to draft 3 of these, and you can see that they all have a different number of X's potentially at the top. And those correspond to the structures and the resources that you're gathering from the center of the board, just like you're making your cheeses. And so as you gain structures, you just get to place them over the top. And when you fill them up, you get the asymmetric ability that they allow you to do. Then you're also going to be gaining cows along this track, and then fruit into this middle. And the interesting thing is the fruit become adaptable. You can either make them into the bread or the jam to go along with the cheese. And so this point scoring is going to be different than these 2 point scores. If you get extra structures, you get 1 point per extra structure. They get some total over here. Same thing with the cows. You get the milk, which gives you the extra cheese making action on your turn, but you get extra cows at the end, you just get 1 point per. Now here's the interesting thing with the jams, which again is a high point scoring potential. If you get 3 of them over here and 2 of them over here, what you actually end up doing is multiplying them to get an additional point total. And you can also see at the bottom of my board right here, this is where those 4 areas are mentioned, where again, you're going to be placing these orders as you fulfill them. And the more in one area, it's going to give you more points. So that's the point scoring. So with this cheese-based game, with the 4 quadrants you're going to be placing your 15 pieces of cheese into, when does the game end actually happen? Well, the game end actually happens when somebody has all of their cheese cubes placed down. And so how fast you can get them down in the first place also is going to make a big difference in sometimes how many points you can actually score. And to be frank, I kind of like it. It's a little tiny bit of a race, because then the milk extra action actually makes some difference. Not just 2 turns, 1 action, but 2 turns. Now I'm 1 step closer to game finish. You need to be aware of this, because otherwise you're going to run out of time to do what you want to do in the first place. Right? Yeah, I like it. So the other aspect I really liked of this game that you're going to overlook at first is you have 3 workers. There are 4 areas. If you're not choosing very carefully, it's like having 2 cookies and 3 kids. How do you make that division happen evenly? Right? That's going to be the tricky sticking point, because if you go for too many of those silver or high value cheeses in the first place, there's potentially turns where you're not going to be doing anything. And again, going back to that race point that I mentioned, just from a fine nuanced standpoint, then you can start to see where 2 actions, 0 actions is going to have a much bigger impact on things. And again, that's kind of why I like it, because it puts a little bit of external pressure as well. So what do I think of this game? Overall, this is an incredibly unique game. I give them a lot of kudos, and I was a little concerned at first about this being overly complicated, but the mechanisms and the actual rules overhead is incredibly low. It reminds me of sort of the old school Euros, sort of like the Kinezias and the Hansa Teutonicas and the El Grandes, where the depth of the strategy is present in the board actions as you're utilizing them, not in how many rules you have to actually memorize of the minutiae in the first place. And so I can't say that I could be any more pleased from that aspect. And I think this Lazy Susan style of, put the worker down and then turn it around until it faces you and then take it off again when it points back to you, and then you can use it. I mean, it creates some interesting dilemmas because you only have 3 workers. There are 4 sections of the board, so how are you going to time that? Do you want to time that? It reminds me very much of another game I just recently reviewed, Lunar Rush, where sometimes slow and steady wins the race, and sometimes you need to be speedy like the hare. And this gives you the option to do both, and sometimes to mitigate and see when you're going to get things back is very important, because you may need resources, you may need cheese, you may need both. You may get additional spots for your workers on these cards in the first place. And so, you know, it's just incredibly unique as a pro. It just does something different. Now, again, I'll say that I like the fact that they've already said that these little inserts, if I break the board apart here for you, and that's another cool thing, right? All of this is modular. You can just spin this around, completely different. Spin this around, completely different setup. You pull this thing out right here, and this is the insert that goes underneath. And you can notice 1 to 2 player and 3 player. And so that's going to be different depending on your player counts, and it's going to give you different spots that are open and closed. And they've already said that they're going to include a whole bunch of extra ones of these in addition to the ones that it starts with standardized, which is going to give a lot more variability. Not that it even needs it at that point, but for all those people that wanted in the first place, you're going to have way too much to begin with. Because although these mechanisms are relatively straightforward, I'll be honest with you, especially as a bad Euro gamer, it's hard to score well because you have a lot of things that you're moving and utilizing in the gold, the silver, and the bronze. And are you matching up the orders more? Are you getting the resources more? Are you going off of other people's areas? How tight is this going to be in some of the other areas like the festival where you need to have yours next to each other? Or how tight is it going to be in the bistro here where other people can fill your tables? And you know, how lazy can you be until the end of the game hoping that someone else is going to fill your table for you until they inevitably don't, and it's going to lose you out points. So the actual mechanisms are very clever, but I would make the argument it kind of is balanced out here by the cons, and this may be the make it or break it for you. Like I said, this is going to be best at 4. No doubts about that whatsoever. It's not going to be nearly as good as 2. This is not going to be your favorite Euro game at 2. It's just not going to have that same feel or vibe in terms of the placement on the board and the interactions and the potential take that of stealing other people's spots at the lower player counts, even though you have a lot of them that are marked off. The other thing you may not like, right, is these order cards, because you're going to get randomization of these, and it's just going to be a straight up draw. You don't automatically get them. You're going to have to take that as one of your actions here in the middle of the board in order to get more. And the problem is sometimes you're going to draw the one that you just used, right? Like you have this little blue cheese, you draw the blue cheese right after you play the blue cheese into the center. So now again, if you use that to draw 3 cards, well, it's going to be 3 turns before you can get this back to be able to fulfill any of these. And so your strategy is going to be not necessarily as perfect as you may want if you're a heavy Euro person in the first place. Also, the area control is a little bit different over on this side of things with the trucks, and you know, again, it works, but it's just something different. It contrasts the other 3 styles, and so it was probably my least favorite area, but it actually, you know, it's still just as fine too, so there's no issue with that. The other side of things that you may not like, again, is the structural cards. These structural cards, you can draft them, and that's great, but you still also may not get the one you want or the ones that you overall want, so you're going to have to be able to pivot. And again, I wouldn't use these in the first game because it's going to be a lot to go on, and in my first game we didn't even really utilize them because we were too busy trying to mismatch and mix match all the other stuff in the first place, point buffet wise, to try and keep track of. So there wasn't overwhelmingly, but it was sort of like, okay, this becomes secondary in my head for right now. Now, subsequently, now that I see how the pieces interact, now I know how big these are going to be because it really wasn't apparent in the first game. And that goes to the other side of things, is this isn't going to be a game where you're going to do well the first time around. This is going to take you a couple tries to kind of see where your strengths are going to lie, how the dynamics are going to change, especially at the player counts, to see whether or not you can adapt the strategy going forward because of the player count differences, and as well as the different locations that are going to be closed. Again, those flippable inserts here are going to be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on how well you like the changes from that aspect. Overall, final thoughts. At first, when I very first started playing this, I was like, this is really weird, putting the cheese down and then putting the worker over it and having to wait until the worker points back around to me. And then by the time I got to the end of the first game, I was like, wow, that's really a clever mechanism of waiting for it to come back and point to you so that you can take it again, because it really changes the dynamic of a worker placement game that I've never really seen before in any way, shape, or form. And it takes a lot to say that nowadays, to do something with a unique twist and not just have it be a complete gimmick. This works, and it works better, mechanically speaking, from a pure Euro side of things, easily, I would say, than their other 2 games. Not disparaging than any of their other games, but this is head and shoulders above from a design aspect. Just fantastic. But is it right for you? Do you want the deluxifications? Do these deluxifications matter to you on the crowdfunding side of things? That's what you have to ask yourself. And again, I'd say the 4-player point, if you play majority of that, this is going to be a better fit than, say, if you're a 2-player Euro person in the first place. And that's okay, but if you really want a truly dynamic experience that this game can offer, 3 or 4 is going to be easily the preferred player count in the first place. So there you go. I love the adaptability. I love the fact you can just take this thing out of the center and just rotate it around, rotate all 4 of these around to mess with people so there's no meta developing or evolving in terms of strategy. There's a little bit of randomization with the structural tiles and the recipes and the orders, so it gives you a little bit of everything on all sides, mechanically speaking, and Road to Infamy Games, they got a pretty freaking sweet game on their hand here. This is going to be for you, though. That's what you got to ask yourself. Hopefully this is helpful. There you go. That's all I got. Stay classy. See you around.